As we continue our Magical Mystery Tour, that song came out in the 60s, and it speaks to an observation anyone in the culture made. Man, people seem angry at each other. Man, people seem to disagree on everything, and what's going on, and how can we reconcile that? Why is it that people of different religious beliefs seemingly hate each other? Why is it people with different political agendas and of different backgrounds don't just disagree, they seem to hate each other? What's going on? One of the things that we hoped we would do 17 years ago when we started our church was that we'd create a place that people who disagreed on anything and everything could befriend each other. Truly, genuinely befriend each other. Talk through their differences, maybe convince each other, maybe not. But whatever the issues were, it wouldn't change the fundamental relationship and friendship that we had with each other. And here we are in 2017, the same question they wrestled with back in the 60s, and it seems like, read any Facebook post, read any Facebook news feed, it seems like people are angrier than ever, they're more intolerant than ever. Conservatives hate liberals, and liberals hate conservatives, and Muslims have strong opinions against Christians, and Christians against atheists, and atheists against Christians. So today we're going to talk about tolerance. And uniquely, religion, in the name of Jesus, some incredibly intolerant things have been done. In the name of atheism, some incredibly intolerant things have been done. In the name of Islam, intolerant things have been done. We're going to look at what real tolerance is, and specifically the words of Jesus. That Jesus may offer something very unique in his core message, in his core mission, that could transform families as we learn not just to tolerate each other, but to befriend and love each other. That we could tolerate, not just that, but befriend people in our family who we disagree with politically or religiously, and our relational capital, our friendship could be the essence. And so we hoped 15 years ago, 17 years ago, that Horizon would be a place that we would come together, gather together, talk together, befriend each other, and hopefully learn how to love each other in a little bit different way. And if there's a God, learn how to love him. If it's with our kids, our colleagues, what would it look like if all of us could put just a little bit more love in our heart? Well, that is actually what we set out to do 17 years ago, is what if we could create a place where people could come and explore faith. And whether you grew up in faith or grew up without faith, or you somehow gave up on faith because, the biggest cause of atheism is Christians, because we're such hypocrites and we so don't live out what we say we're living out. Wherever you were on the journey, what if we really learned how to befriend each other? And what if Horizon could be a place that we could learn how to put love in each other's heart? So 17 years ago, a whole bunch of people who lived in primarily Indian Hill, Terrace Park, Marymount, had friends they'd known for 20-something years who didn't go to church, but they would have great conversations at the country club, at a barbecue. And they said, why don't we start a church that would allow us to have conversations with our friends that we're already having in other locations? And so they wrote handwritten notes to 10, 15 of their friends and just say, there's no pressure to come, but we're starting a church for people who hate church. And based on the great conversations we've had over the years, we think you'd love it. And we designed this idea of having a two-service design where we would have an exploring environment and an equipping environment. Where in one service, like this morning, we're going verse by verse through the book of Leviticus, if you can believe that, for the last several months, trying to dig into what that book's really about. Then we'd have another type of environment where friends could come and could just explore and just ask questions and be okay to doubt and be okay to wonder. Then 6 years ago, we moved into this building, and right before we moved into the building, we actually passed out personal blank handwritten cards and said, it's a new generation. And as we move into the new building, maybe you'll invite your friends. Friends who may be religious, friends who may not be religious. And invite them into the context of a conversation where we talk about the things we agree on, the things we disagree on, and see what God might do. It's been amazing the last couple of years to see how that vision and that welcoming spirit and that love has really permeated the place and begun to change folks. In fact, we did a series a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. It's called Hot Seat. And so in Hot Seat, I was put in the hot seat, and I brought several of my friends in. A friend of mine who's a Muslim, Majid Abdu, who asked me his hardest questions for 40 minutes. Another friend of mine who's an agnostic writer for Cincinnati Magazine asked me his hardest questions from an agnostic perspective. And one day, one of our leaders in the church was sitting in the back row of the section, and somebody had invited a friend who clearly did not come to the same conclusions I have about the Bible and Jesus. And I was giving my explanation to my friend who was asking me about whatever was the problem of evil or something. And I got done with my explanation, and one of the leaders in our church heard the guy in front of him say, "That's bullschnizzle." But he didn't say bullschnizzle. And he was telling me the story. I said, "How do you feel about somebody saying that in church?" He goes, "It was great." Here's a leader of our church affirming exactly how I felt. What is so great that we can be together and disagree and be open and honest about what we disagree about. That's the kind of environment we wanted to create. Even recently, one of the reasons we designed the building the way we did is we wanted to create an environment where it felt like a community park. It felt like a sacred space or a sanctuary. We had a girl, a college, if I remember, who hadn't been in church for years, was struggling with a lot of personal issues in her family life, and didn't even want to come to the church. It just felt too religious. And so she met with one of our staff members out in the back patio and said, "Man, I've never been out here. But this feels like a great, safe place to have these kind of conversations." And for about an hour, sitting out in our atrium, there's just a great conversation about conflict in the family, how to deal with that, whether or not God exists, whether or not there's wisdom to handle that kind of stuff. And that's what we wanted to create. In fact, recently, a friend of mine is in a Bible study, and he invited one of his friends who's never been in a Bible study together. And as they were in Bible study together, they came to the end of the Bible study, and the leader turned to his friend and said, "Hey, do you want to pray at the end?" He goes, "Well, I'll give it a shot." So his friend prayed at the end of the Bible study and said, "Amen." He looks up. He says, "You know what? I think that's the second time I've ever prayed in my life." And to me, that's what Horizon's about. It's a place to experiment. It's a place to try things. It's a place to ask questions. It's a place to wonder. And we live in a culture today that's increasingly intolerant, increasingly antagonistic, increasingly friendships divide over differences, families divide over differences. And we're all aware of the problem, but we're not sure how to solve it. And so our culture tells us we should be tolerant, and yet as much as we hear the culture tell us every day, all the time we should be tolerant, we look around like, where are all the tolerant people? We don't see them on the news, we don't see them on CNN, and we don't see them on Fox. We don't see them on Facebook, we don't see them on Instagram. Where are all the tolerant people while we're being bombarded with what it means to be tolerant? And this is where I think Jesus offers something unique that's different from history. It's even different from religion. It's certainly different from what's been done in his name. Jesus offers a different definition of tolerance, and something higher than tolerance. See, tolerance is the love and behavior you display to those you consider intolerant. Oh, we can all tolerate people that we like, but I want you to think of who you think is intolerant. So if you think Christians are intolerant, then how do you behave toward them? If you think atheists are intolerant, do you truly love an atheist? If you think the liberals are the problem in the world, do you truly love and befriend people who disagree with you politically? If you think conservatives are the problem, do you truly love and befriend people who you think are intolerant? See, Jesus is the gold standard. Whatever religion you've ever studied, I've never seen a more higher gold, platinum standard for tolerance than Jesus. Because Jesus is having nails pounded into his feet, pounded into his hands, people who are crucifying him, the Romans. And he looks into the face of his enemies who are actually killing him. And what are the words that come out of him? "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's not just tolerant, like, I'll put up with this family vacation, I'll put up with this dinner. This is a level of love and forgiveness and behavior that is unheard of. So much so that look at Jesus' words. Jesus says, here's what I want you, if you're truly following me, if you're truly understanding my message, here's what will start to come out of you. Maybe not perfectly, but you'll start to see this new type of behavior toward those you consider intolerant. But I say to those who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who spitefully use you. Well, this is quite a list. To him who strikes you on one cheek, give him the other. From him who takes one coat, offer him your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. And he goes on. And if you love those who love you, if you only tolerate people who agree with you, what good is that? Everybody does that. Any common sinner does that. What credit's that? Even sinners do that. And if you love those who love you, What credit's that? You do good only to those who do good to you? What credit is that? If you lend to those that you hope to receive back, what credit is that? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But I want you to love your enemies, to do good, to lend, hoping for nothing in return, that your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, that you'll be living out a new type of love and a new type of identity. Because the God we're talking about, he says, is kind to the unthankful, and he is merciful to the people who don't deserve mercy. And therefore, you will be like your Father when you extend mercy to people who don't deserve it. I mean, imagine what our culture would be like if anyone actually attempted to live that out in their company, in their family, in their culture. So I want to look at historically two ways that a pluralistic society has tried to deal with differences. And they haven't worked real well. One is be quiet, and the other is berate the people you disagree with. And then I want to show you how Jesus offers a unique resource for not be quiet or berate, but how to befriend people we disagree with, and how to play that out. The first thing is historically we've seen that the way different cultures, whoever's been in the majority, has pretty much tried to quiet the minority. And whether it was the Christians who were in charge who basically said, hey, if you're Catholic, you're okay. If you're Jewish, you're okay. But if you're Muslim, you're not. And if you're gay, you're not. And there wasn't a lot of inclusiveness toward a pluralistic society. And there's a certain set of dogma, and if you believe this dogma, you're okay. And if you didn't, it was heresy, and you sort of got pushed against or attacked in some way. And now it seems like the dogma has flipped, where now the Christian case for certain things is starting to go down, and now there's a different set of dogma and a different set of heresy and equal amounts of intolerance. And in his book, Exclusion and Embrace, Dr. Wolf says that historically, if you study any culture, there's 4 ways that the majority treat the minority, and they're almost all bad. The 4 methods are, number 1, elimination. It's genocide. You come in, people disagree with you religiously, you kill them. People disagree with your position on whatever it is, you kill them. Elimination. That's usually what happens in history. And you can fill in the blank. Christians did it, Islams did it, atheists did it. Second thing is domination. Persians come in, they say, listen, we don't mind that you have a minor view of religion or a minor view of whatever it is, but just know and recognize we're the dominant force. We're Rome, we're Persian. As long as you recognize we're dominating you, we'll give you certain levels of freedom as long as it doesn't get in the way of us being the supreme leader. The third way was assimilation. You can live here if you assimilate and agree that everything we say is true. Our list of dogma, our list of heresy, then it's permissible. As long as you agree with us, we'll be tolerant of you. Which doesn't create a lot of space for difference of opinion. Or fourthly is abandonment. We're going to stick you in a little corner like the Amish community. Do whatever you want. Just we're going to abandon you to your own little enclave and just keep to yourself and don't bother, don't talk, don't influence anyone else. And then the basic assumption is the problem in the culture today, the problem in history is we got too many fundamentalists. If we get rid of the extremists and get rid of the fundamentalists, then we'd all be fine. But I want to challenge you to say that fundamentalism isn't a problem, and extremism isn't a problem. It depends on what you're fundamental or extreme about. Like, I've never seen a Quaker terrorist. Now, that's a pretty fundamentalist or extreme group, right? But what are they extreme about? They're extreme about pacifism. They're extreme about love. They're extreme about Jesus loving your enemies. And so the problem is not like get rid of the extremists. It's what are we extreme about? What if we were extreme about loving our enemies? What if we were extreme about trying to include people that we disagreed with and have conversations? One of the most powerful stories in 2007, I remember the story, it's the story of an Amish community. A gunman came in and shot up their community, shot up their families, shot up their children. And NPR did a story about as this Amish community grieved, and they were on their way to the funeral, and they gathered their children and their horse and the buggies, and on their way, they brought gifts. The gunman had died in the fight. They brought gifts to the gunman's mother. And they said, we know what it's like to lose a child. We can only imagine what you must feel like to lose your child. The gunman who shot your... And they came to her and said, we want you to know that we practice forgiveness even of our enemies because Jesus did. And they grieved with her, and they bought her like groceries and things to help provide for her. And the story was all over the place that these fundamental extremists, Amish, were practicing something extreme that showed itself to be so distinct in a world that says, be quiet if you disagree with me. Be quiet, I don't want to hear what you have to say. It was saying, listen, we may disagree on a lot of stuff, but we are extreme about our love and forgiveness of our enemies. See, Christianity offers a different way. Not necessarily the expression of Christianity, but the way of Jesus does. The second expression is not be quiet, but berate. And I think one of the biggest things we see is that when you berate somebody, it's because you're filled with self-righteousness. It's not just that you're right, it's that they're all wrong. And you're filled with such self-righteousness that you're able to not only disagree but condemn. And Christianity, properly understood, really should extract self-righteousness. Whatever your positions are on God, Bible, Jesus, politics, it should at least extract the self-righteousness, because the main message of the Bible is that you and I, the biggest problem in the human heart is self-righteousness, pride, arrogance. So much so that Jesus, God himself, had to come to earth to die a brutal, horrific death for our self-righteousness. And the one thing we should be wary of, the one thing we should be careful of is self-righteousness, because we know that's what caused God to need to come to earth to die. And Jesus' message, properly understood, should not result in berating other people, even when we disagree with them. Now the view goes like this. It goes, well, Chad, I think that the solution is if we could just coexist. And what do I mean by coexist is no one should impose their view on someone else. I said, well, that sounds good. And so we see this bumper sticker, one of my favorite bumper stickers, coexist. And that bumper sticker, if you've seen it, basically says no one should impose their view on somebody else's view. Right? But what is the bumper sticker doing? But imposing its view upon everybody. You better agree with me that we need to coexist. So you're imposing your view on me about why I shouldn't impose my view on somebody else, right? Do you see the problem? And then the idea is we need to pretend that religions don't have differences. And I hope what you found in the last 8 weeks together is religions have radical differences on every subject. Source of truth, problem in the world, solution to the world, what happens when you die, where you go when you die, how you get there. Radical differences. So pretending religions aren't different is just ignorant. So how do we, in the midst of those differences, have conversations? And I would suggest it's in the context of friendship. And many people think the problem is Christianity, because Christianity makes exclusive truth claims. Jesus is the only way to God. If we could get rid of the Christians with their exclusive truth claims, we have this solved. Even Bernie Sanders this week was interviewed. If you saw his interview on Fox News, he said, I don't mind Christians who have freedom of religion to express whatever they want, but they can't serve in government, because I don't want people with exclusive truth claims about what they believe about God serving in government. And I think Bernie Sanders gave a good explanation of a common misconception. The common misconception is that Christians believe exclusively that Jesus is the only way to God, and that's true. The Christians do believe that. And no one else makes exclusive truth claims. He was actually sort of hammering Christians because they were Islamophobic. I'm like, well, Bernie, do you not know anything about Islam? Islam has an exclusive truth claim. There's one God, and He is Allah. He is not Jesus. He is not Jehovah. And if you claim that Jesus is God, you're not getting to heaven either, because that's blasphemy. And guess what? Hinduism and Buddhism makes exclusive truth claims. You know the reason you have problems in your life, the reason you have evil in your life, is because the universe is punishing you. You're experiencing karma. Try and talk a Hindu out of karma. Try and talk a Muslim out of Allah. Try and talk a Christian out of Jesus. Trying to pretend these aren't differences isn't going to work. What if instead there was a way that we could want to befriend people and talk about the differences and dialogue together? Wouldn't that be a better way than pretending that the differences don't exist? Berating other people doesn't work. Quieting other people doesn't work. So Jesus shows up and He does something amazing. He tells a story of the Old Testament God. Most of us think, oh, the Old Testament God, He's really ticked off. He's got a lightning bolt. And I think I could build a strong case that the God of the Old Testament is just as merciful and forgiving as Jesus. But I won't try and do that today. But I will give you an example of it. Jesus shows up one day and tells a story from the Old Testament. Here's how the story goes. Historically, there was a group called the Samaritans. They lived in Samaria. And they had an army, and they were trying to attack the Jews, the Israelites. And every time they went to attack, the Israelites had this prophet named Elisha that God kept giving them visions of the plans of the enemy in advance. And so the Samaritan king's getting really frustrated because every time they're about to attack, the armies are there to stop. And they try this. He thinks he's got a spy in his midst. He thinks he's got a leak in his midst. It turns out he determines, the Sumerian king, that Elisha is getting divine revelation from God to ruin his plans. So he says, okay, we're going to go kill off Elisha. So he sends a whole legion of his army to go kill off Elisha. And on their way to come get Elisha, again, if you think the guy's got miraculous powers, I'm not sure how many armies you send. Like how many people, how many soldiers do you send to kill off a guy who's got miraculous powers? Not enough is the answer. So he sends all of the legion. They come against Elisha, and Elisha sees them all and goes, sorry, and they all get blinded. And as the account goes in 2 Kings, they get blinded, and now they don't know where to go. And suddenly a man comes up and says, here, I will help you and I will lead you. Now they don't realize the guy who's leading them is Elisha. But they're blind, and so each one's following another. Come with me, we found somebody. And so they're following the lead, and this guy's helping them. And as they're leading along, they come to actually the central city of Jerusalem. Doors open. They now come into the central city. They're now in Jerusalem, and the doors get shut. And so Elisha waves his arm again. Their eyes open, and they're like, oh no. We followed the guy we were trying to kill into the central city of the place we're trying to destroy. And here they are now, the entire Samaritan legion, surrounded by the Israelite soldiers. And the king, now of Jerusalem, says to Elisha, should we kill him? And look at this Old Testament God. Look at what Elisha says. And certainly under the ethics of war, you could argue that they tried to kill you, therefore you have a right to defend yourself. Certainly a strong ethical case could be made, but look what happens here in the story. The king says, my father, shall I kill him? Shall we kill him? And he answered, as Elijah, let's not kill him. Would you kill those who've been taken captive? In other words, you don't kill POWs, sort of a strong ethic here in the Old Testament, with your sword and your bow. In fact, let's not just tolerate them. Let's just not kill them. Let's try something different. So Elisha and the king of Jerusalem, who have their enemies right where they want them, say, let's instead set food and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. So, what they do to their enemies in 2 Kings is they prepare a great feast for their enemies. And after they ate, meaning the Sumerians and the Hebrews, who had political differences, they had racial differences, they ate together, they drank together, they befriended each other that moment, and they then sent them away to go back to their master, the king of Samaria. And so the bands of Syrian raiders came no more into the land of Israel. And for years there was peace. Now notice, these people came from Samaria. Now, does it make you think of a famous story Jesus told? We'll come back to that in a moment. But what Jesus is doing is Jesus is saying, even in the Old Testament, there is this call for God's people. Now, certainly there's times somebody's trying to kill you, you need to defend yourself. But whenever possible, to try and love your enemies, befriend your enemies, do good to your enemies. And it transformed the culture. And Jesus turns it into a famous parable that many have heard even today, which I'll get to in a moment. I told this story, I was speaking at a country club last December, and I shared this story that one of Jesus' most famous parables comes from that. And several people came up and said, I'm Jewish, I don't believe in Jesus. But I was amazed. I never knew Jesus' parable that I'd heard about comes from the Torah, comes from our book. Let's talk more about that. They were intrigued. I got to see this firsthand about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I did a funeral here, and it was very, very hard. They're all hard, but this was particularly hard. We had a 28-year-old girl who had overdosed on heroin. And her boyfriend, who also had struggles with addiction, had not seen his girlfriend because he'd been in rehab. And I happened to walk out just as he was coming in the front door, and many of the people who attended the funeral live in our community. Many were part of the culture that sort of ended up taking her life. The parents were standing at the casket grieving the loss of their daughter, and I saw the boyfriend, who easily could have been blamed for the situation or any amount of case. As he came up, I saw this couple looking at their daughter. They turned and saw the boyfriend, and they quickly made their way over to him, wrapped their arms around him, and said, thanks for being here. My jaw dropped as I watched. Let's walk up there together. And together they walked up to the casket as he just began to shake. His whole body began to just shake in grief. And I watched as people who could easily have built a case for being enemies grieve together the loss of someone they loved. Every once in a while, you move from hearing about religion and the terrible things it's done to seeing something like that. You say, now, I don't know what that is, but that's not religion. I don't know what that is, but we need more of that in our life. We need more of that in our culture. A good friend of mine passed away. We had a funeral for him last Sunday. I wasn't able to attend. My friend Kenneth. Kenneth and I have been friends for 15 years, 17 years, 13 years that I've been here. Kenneth was a hair salonist, and he would come and cut my hair all the time, and we had the best conversations. I don't think we agreed on half the stuff. And every time we get together, I love cutting your hair because we get to talk about it, and we talked about everything. And I mean everything. Inappropriate things and appropriate things. And if you had a conversation with Kenneth, it was 50-50 on what was appropriate and what wasn't. But man, that's what I loved about our friendship. In fact, I was on Jill's Facebook account, and I said, one of my favorite lines by C.S. Lewis is he said, when one of your friends dies, a piece of you dies too. Because certain friends can bring out of you a side of yourself that only they can bring out of you. And the loss of friendship is that when we don't have a diverse group of friends, there's pieces of us that aren't brought out, the fullness of who we are. That's the beauty of friendship. Which is why Christianity offers an alternative. The way of Jesus offers an alternative. Not to be quiet other voices, not to berate other voices, but to truly befriend. Not for the sake of persuasion, not for the sake of conversion, though truly when you're friends, you share things that are important to you. So I would hope if I have a friend who's an atheist and thinks I'm wrong, I would hope if he cares about me, he would try and convince me that I'm wrong. And I would hope that if we're friends, he'd want me to try and convince him why I've come to my conclusions. But our friendship is not about turning each other into projects. It's about we're really friends. And that's what Jesus offers here. How do we befriend one another, even in our differences? And here's where I think the Bible, properly understood, has something very unique, not on the outside outskirts of its teaching, but at the core of its teaching. At the core of Christianity is that God came to earth to die. Wouldn't you agree with that? It's not like a little obscure dogma. That's sort of the core. Jesus came to die. For who? Romans sums it up really well. Romans 5 says, here's what the main message of the Bible is about. You and I'm going to talk just to people who call themselves Christians. If you call yourself a Christian, the Bible teaches that you and I as Christians were enemies of God. Enemies. Why? Because we decide not to worship God. We decide to worship stuff or things or beauty or what we made or our performance or our quarterly results. We chose anything to worship except God. And that made us an enemy. We said, God, you're my enemy. And how did God feel toward us when we were his enemy? Look, when we were his enemies, we were reconciled to God. He tried to befriend us. He tried to pursue us. And he even came and died a great sacrifice to himself. He gave his son to die so that he could reconcile with his enemies. Now, if that was true, and of course I believe it is, but if that goes from like sort of a theoretical dogma from your head that goes into your heart, if you really believe that you are an enemy of God, and that God loved you so much that he pursued you at great cost to lose something of great value to himself. And if then he puts that spirit in you, that you will be saved or delivered or transformed by his life, wouldn't you naturally, wouldn't it be connect the dots? Wouldn't it be sort of a natural impulse that if God did that for me while I was an enemy, that I should do the same to my enemies? Of course. If you properly understand the message of the Bible, it's that God loved and reconciled and cared for and befriended me when I was an enemy. So of course I want to go and do the same. Of course I want to treat other people the way God treated me. That's the main message of the Bible. Which is why Jesus tells a story. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time there was a certain man. He was Jewish. And he was on his way on the road to Jericho. And I was in Israel. The road to Jericho is this very thin road, which is right on the rocks. It's about this wide. And as you're walking on the road, you either fall off a cliff or you run into a rock wall. And as this man was walking along, he got beaten by bandits. And he's laying there on this very narrow path. One of his friends came along, a fellow Jewish person, a fellow religious Jewish person. It would be the equivalent today of me saying the Pope showed up and then Billy Graham showed up. And when the Pope showed up, he walked around him, which is Jesus being funny, because if you knew the road to Jericho, you can't walk around anybody on this road. So walking around them literally meant stepping over him. Because he was too busy on his way to a religious activity to help and care for a fellow brother, even though he's religious. And after the Pope ignored him, Billy Graham showed up. And Billy Graham shows up walking on the road to Jericho, a Levite, and he sees this man, and he walked around him, which is Jesus' funny way of saying he stepped on him and over him. He too, a religious person with the same ethnic background, with the same racial background, didn't help his brother. And then came a Samaritan. Oh, where does that ring a bell? Oh, that's right. The Old Testament speaks about the division between the Samaritans and the Hebrew people. Political differences, racial differences, religious differences. So Jesus purposely puts in his story that this man's enemy, politically, racially, religiously, shows up. A man who should hate this man. And as he walks along, he sees this man beaten, and the Good Samaritan picks up his enemy, feeds him. Oh, isn't that what they did in 2 Kings? Clothes him, gives him water, takes him to a hospital, leaves him in an inn and says, "Take care of my friend." Your friend, isn't he your enemy? The culture tells you should hate this person because of you guys disagree on the center of worship. Is it in Sychar or is it in Jerusalem? You should disagree with each other because of your history and what's happened in the past. And Jesus ends this story, the story we know as the Good Samaritan, and he says, which of these three was a good neighbor? To which even the religious people listening are like, well, the Samaritan was. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, those who showed mercy on him. Jesus says, go and do likewise. And here's the challenge. I know two Christian friends who are currently not talking and fighting. And why are they fighting? Because they got a difference of opinion on how to parent. And that's not just a preference different. That is worthy of dividing a family. That's worthy of destroying a friendship. And as that commotion is occurring in their life, we're watching, right? And we're saying Christians can't even get along. They can't even tolerate their friends. They can't even tolerate their family, let alone love their enemy. Why would I want anything to do with that? And the minute we get self-righteous, we go, I've done the same thing because I'm ticked off at my brother, or I'm ticked off at my sister, What if we were neighbors the way Jesus encouraged us to be neighbors? We truly befriended our kids when we disagree with them. Doesn't mean there aren't consequences, don't mean there aren't discipline. But what if friendship and relationship is the core of our differences of opinion with those who have a different opinion about religion or different opinion about politics? What if friendship, everything subordinated itself to the importance of our friendship? Wouldn't society be better? Wouldn't our family be better? Wouldn't we not get so ratcheted up about whatever it is we get so ratcheted up about? Which is why I think Jesus offers something unique. And I want to go back to his teaching I started with. What does it mean to befriend people that you disagree with? To practice a kind of love and behavior toward those you consider intolerant is befriending. Jesus says befriending is about practicing a new kind of kindness. I'll give you two aspects of that he mentioned in that early passage. Number one, what if you practiced a kindness, the kind that hopes for nothing in return? Isn't it true that most of us, we sort of give so we can get in marriage, we give so we can get in our workplace? What if you began to practice a new kind of kindness, a kindness that hopes for nothing in return? Jesus says, love your enemies, do good, lend, hope for nothing in return. I memorized this verse several years ago, probably 7 years ago. My wife and I are going through just a real difficult time in our marriage, and I realized that part of what she was feeling was expectation. One, because I have a high need for affirmation, a high need for attention, and that's not all inappropriate, but it was becoming inappropriate. So I memorized this verse, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to practice for a season in my marriage, practicing, helping, putting her needs ahead of my own as best I can, and I'm going to add on hoping for nothing in return. And I was amazed at that short season. I'm not saying I don't still try and do it, but I worked really hard during that season. I was amazed how it changed the dynamic of our relationship in a good way. I was practicing a new kind of kindness the kind that hoped for nothing in return. The second aspect of this kindness is the kind of kindness that's kind to the unthankful. Now, nothing makes me angrier, honestly, than people who are ungrateful and unappreciative. And I get real self-righteous. I would never do that. I would never forget to say. I wouldn't appreciate. And God's beginning to rescue me from my self-righteousness. And here's where Jesus says this. What if you weren't just kind to the kind? What if you were kind to those who are unthankful? And here's how he connects that behavior to understanding who the God of the Bible is. For he, God, is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. Therefore, if you understand how God is kind to the unthankful, and by the way, Chad, you were very unthankful to what he did for you, giving you birth, giving you life, allowing you to be born this time in history, at this point in America. You've been very unthankful. Oh my goodness. You go to a third world country, everybody comes back and says, we're so unthankful here. And when you begin to understand that God loves you and is gracious and generous toward you when you're unthankful and when you're evil, then you will go and be merciful and kind to people who are unthankful in your life. Because just as your Father did it to you, you want to do unto others. I'll tell you one story, and I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. I was pretty tangled up in bitterness because I felt like I had been treated unfairly. And I feel like I could, even to this day, build a pretty objective case that I was treated unfairly. And though I thought I'd forgiven, I found myself entangled in it. I just couldn't get free from it. And it came to my attention that the person or the group that I felt like had treated me poorly, they had a need of a particular thing that I had access to. Do you think I'm going to lift a finger to help them after what they did to me? And I heard Jesus saying, why don't you give to those expecting nothing in return? I'm going to lift a finger to help those people out. And Jesus said, I want you to trust that my way works. I don't want that does not work. I've already been smacked up. Give me another. Thank you. I remember that day. I got access to this thing. I went down to the location they're at, and I handed this thing over. I said, hey, I heard you guys had need for this. I have access to it. I hope this helps. And at that moment, they all gathered around and said, Chad, thank you. You're the best. No. It was, thanks. And I'm telling you, to this day, it was like 5 years ago, I can still date that moment when I gave a gift to somebody expecting nothing in return. I began to get untangled from my bitterness. I've not struggled with that situation. I've not struggled with that moment since. Giving to your enemies, expecting nothing in return, transforms you in a way that brought incredible freedom into my life. I decided to be thankful to those who were kind to those who were unthankful to me. So to show you this is not just theoretical, I thought it might be fun to introduce you to a friend of mine. We've been friends for about a year now. So can you give a warm horizon welcome to my friend Bill? Can we invite Bill up? Hey, Bill, come on up. Thanks for being with us today, Bill.
Yeah. Glad
So,
to
Bill,
be
we've
here.
been friends for, about a year now?
Yeah, a little more than that, right. Yep.
And tell us a little about your spiritual background. Then I want to show you a video clip that you want us to show.
I grew up Methodist over in a little town north of Indianapolis, Westfield, and then kind of had a journey to different factions of Christianity. A little nervous, sorry. Last thing I thought I'd ever be doing 2 years ago would be sitting up in front of a church. So I'm usually the kind that if I ever go, I kind of fall now in the realm of, I would say the non-religious, but I usually sit in the back in case I fall asleep. And leave gracefully.
Try and keep Bill asleep.
But anyway, I've been more recently exposed to several different religions and even different cultures, Russian culture being one of them. But, Buddhism, I had some exposure to Mormonism, Jewish, and, Catholicism, all the different major religions.
All the isms.
Yeah, all the isms. And the most recently at Ethicon, where I work, I'm a technical person, so I kind of a lot of times have a little bit of trouble with things that are more matters of the heart. I kind of tend to like proof for things. So Chad and I have had quite a few good discussions about these things. But anyway, the thing that kind of really spoke to me was all these different religions that I'm exposed to recently. There are some just wonderful people in all the different religions. So it's difficult for me to believe that one has the absolute answer versus any of the others. And some of the most evolutionary evolved societies are some of the most peaceful nations and among the happiest people. So it's hard for me to believe that one is better than the other. That, people are generally the same everywhere. They learn prejudices and things during life, and what we end up believing is just something that we really need to kind of think through. And there's a good video clip we'll play here that's from the life of Pi that kind of exemplifies that. But
okay, let's watch that, and then we'll come back to your story. So over the course of our friendship, Bill shared lots of videos with me, which I've loved. Some George Carlin, where he is just railing on the inconsistencies of Christianity, or a lot of debates between Christians and non-Christians, where both sides are just so us versus them, you're the problem, so self-righteous. And so what I've enjoyed about our conversations is that we've just been able to talk about everything: God, Bible, Jesus, science, in a way that we disagree with, but in a way that just really has strengthened our friendship. And so tell me a little about Horizon. Our desire at Horizon is to create a place where people of differing opinions can come together and be friends. How have you felt that in the last year in your attendance?
Well, if I didn't feel that the things that you said are true, I wouldn't be up here, believe me. It's really been a very engaging thing. And Chad and I have as he said, we've been going to lunches for better than a year now. And we usually pick a little restaurant nearby. And sometimes our discussions get fairly loud and spirited. And there was one in particular just around the corner at a little restaurant where we were talking about the different things. And unbeknownst to us, there was another person who had been eavesdropping and
leaning in the whole time, 2 hours.
And about 2 hours had gone by, and finally he tapped out. And he said, "Okay, I have to leave, but I've been listening to your conversations. It's among the most interesting things I've ever heard." So I thought, oh, well, that's good. It shows that a lot of people, I think, have these concerns and of the differences.
And I remember that because he's like, I like what you guys are talking about, but I'm actually more struck by the cordialness by which you guys are discussing something that you both so strongly disagree with. So,
because as Chad said, if you really watch the YouTube videos of like Richard Dawkins and Ray Comfort and Kurt Cameron, and there was another one that's...
there's no lack of them.
There's a lot of them out there that are pretty contentious. Well, George Carlin. We couldn't find 20 seconds of George Carlin that we could play.
What's funny, though?
But if you ever watch that one about religion and the Ten Commandments, it's pretty funny, but we couldn't do it here. So anyway, yeah.
So at Horizon, you felt welcomed. And what about, we're not just trying to create a building that's safe. We're trying to create people that have a new type of attitude. How have you felt, just the people you've interacted with, and even if you don't agree with conclusions we've come to, that the spirit is different?
It's been very engaging. As I said, I wouldn't be here if not. And Chad's friendship, and I've actually seen his home, how he's fixed up his home for his son, and he and Beth are so devoted to that child. It's a very exemplary thing. And as far as like just the engagement and the ability to talk about differences has been very helpful to someone who's kind of not in agreement with certain aspects of it. As a matter of fact, sometimes when I'm in the back, if I hear something, not here, but at other churches prior, if I heard something that was getting me too riled up, I would it's a good reason to sit in the back, because I would just leave. And I swore, a few years ago, I was never going to come to church again until my daughter said, "Hey, you should go, Chad. You're very kindred spirits. You would really like him." And I have to say, she was right again. And it's been a very welcoming environment, and I'm glad I came. And I always get something out of it when I come. First time I came, they were just belting out "Won't Get Fooled Again" by The Who. I thought Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey were right here on stage. It was that good. And then the message was Custom Home Series he was doing. It was really, I felt resonated well with me, as did this. I can understand why Chad invited me to talk today because of our discussions and the differences.
And I'd say in the same way, I've learned a lot from our friendship as well. I mean, sometimes where I might say, for example, hey, Bill, what's one of your obstacles to Christianity? And he'd say, that's pretty presumptuous that you think that I should be where you are. And I say, I didn't even think about that. That's a great point. Versus me saying, hey, as we talk about Christianity, you may never be a Christian, and because you could easily say to me, Chad, what's your obstacle to coming to reason and giving up on this whole nonsense, right? I mean, I've realized that there's even unintentional things we say, and so like we did the Easter service this year. I asked Bill to come into our creative team and just say, hey, Bill, we're creating an Easter service. Obviously, we're not changing our positions on Jesus, God, the Bible, resurrection, but I do want to try and be sensitive to how we can communicate that in a way that doesn't have unintentional offensive language. And so Bill came in, just was so nice to spend about 2 hours with our team and just give us perspective. And so I've learned so much from our friendship that's really I've really enjoyed too, and I'm better for it.
It's been very good. I think being able to talk about differences without the fear of anger or one party being upset or trying to feel like they have to convince the other. It's a very engaging process. It's very relaxing to do that, and I think if more people could do that, we'd end up in a much better place in the world, really.
Yeah.
And then that's not limited to just religion; it's cultures as well. We hear so much about other cultures, and then you meet somebody from that other culture, and you find out, wow, it's not like I was told at all. So it's been good. And
I appreciate it.
Glad I'm up here. Glad I came.
Yeah, I appreciate being courageous enough to do it. Can we thank Bill for doing that? That's a big risk for him, and well, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Bill. Well, this ends our series on the Magical Mystery Tour, and we hope it encourages you to ask bigger questions, to begin to investigate things that you think you believe or thought you believed or not sure why you believe. And so next week we're starting a brand new series. It's called Epic, that we're going to look at movies. What are our favorite movies that we've ever seen, and why is it there's certain themes in those movies that are consistent? And what might that speak to the bigger desires of our heart for a grander story, a grander plan, someone to rescue us, a world that once was good has been destroyed by evil? What do movies tell us about maybe a bigger story that God has for us? So thanks for being here today. We'll see you next week for Epic. Thanks again.